It's time for another episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show, a podcast where I connect you with thought leaders from across the globe, digging into some of my favorite topics like personal development, marketing, spirituality, and pretty much any other shiny object that happens to catch my attention. Today, my special guest is Mary Grabar, and we're going to be discussing her new book, Debunking the 1619 Project, Exposing the Plan to Divide America. Mary, it's truly an honor. Welcome back to the show.
Well, thank you. It's great to be back.
Well, Mary, I'm thinking last time we talked about Howard Zinn and that him as a figure and that book, no end of drama, and depending on the circles you're talking about Howard in. But this book, I'm curious, were you a glutton for punishment in terms of how people were going to respond to you on Twitter, or was there a different passion that drove you down the path of putting this new project together? Tell us how this journey got started for you.
Yeah, well, actually, the 1619 Project, which was a special issue of the New York Times Magazine that came out on August 18th, came out, I think, the day before my Howard Zinn book was released. And so here I am getting ready to do interviews about the Howard Zinn book. And I see this and I read it. And I thought, well, it couldn't get much worse than Howard Zinn, but in its own unique way, the 1619 Project is equally as bad, a little different take. But I started reading it and I thought, oh, there's just so much that is left out. It's so incendiary. It's so hateful, in the same way that Howard Zinn's book is. And then furthermore, I learned that not only is this just, something that New York Times readers can read, it has been immediately distributed to schools. And it was going to be a part of the curriculum in 3,500 schools across the country. And immediately that semester. And I thought, I can't let this rest. I have to correct these lies. And I'm glad that I did because, parents are rightfully upset about this toxic false history being taught to their children.
And with Howard Zinn, it took some time for his content to really penetrate the education system, if you will. Have we ever seen a situation where something was just magically adopted overnight? I mean, this seems like it happened way faster than normal.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it used to be that you would, it takes several years from the idea for a new textbook to the writing of it, to the peer review process, through the committees, and on and on. And you're, right to, bring up the idea or the fact that Howard Zinn's book got a slow start and it had a cumulative effect. The initial press run was only like 4,000 copies. And then each year it has sold more and more copies than the previous year. But this was very curious because you had the New York Times, which is, of course, a for profit company, which had partnered with its educational partner, the Pulitzer Center, to distribute this to the schools. And it came in a nice prepackaged form for teachers with discussion questions, lesson plans, Quizlets. So here, teacher, this is all prepackaged. You don't have to do much and, start teaching this. So this was all very well planned in advance. There was a lot of money behind it. The Pulitzer Center, which is not affiliated with the Pulitzer Prize, gets money from the Omidyar Network, which is the sort of the foundation of a billionaire who started eBay, I believe, Pierre Omidyar. It also gets money from a Facebook foundation. So this was all coordinated and planned. And I don't know if there is anything in education as far as a curriculum goes that was so well orchestrated and so quickly adopted and promoted with so much money.
And I know for a lot of us, we were just trying to survive the last couple of years. So we've seen mentions of the 1619 Project really a lot in the news and on social media. I think many of us have heard about Nicole Hannah Jones, at least in passing, mentioned somewhere. But for somebody who has no, maybe they've heard of the 1619 Project, but they have no idea who Nicole Hannah Jones is. Give us a little bit of context for her. I always feel like it's important we know somebody's background if they're the person behind something.
Okay, well, first of all, she is not a historian. She is not a scholar. As far as I know, she has never taught a class in her life. She is a race journalist for the New York Times. Her beat is race. And she is a radical left winger. She has written about her admiration for Fidel Castro's Cuba after a visit there. When she tweets her articles, the articles that she retweets are those that are promoted by the squad of the Democratic Party. She believes in a redistribution of wealth, of reparations, socialized health care, every Black Lives Matter, every single talking point of the far left of the Democratic Party, she is with. She is so not at all qualified to write something that not only talks about this year, but attempts to reframe, to use her term, all of American history from its founding. And this is a person who, furthermore, in spite of her lack of credentials, refuses to take any kind of criticism at all. She is a hardcore ideologue. And for those who attempt to criticize her, some of our best respected and most accomplished historians, she just, slams them, insults them, often ignores them, refuses to engage, and so forth.
Yeah, it seems when you try to enter into any level of meaningful discussion, you're just going to get your character questioned. You're going to be insulted and just really trying to discount you or cancel you, even if you're trying to really wrestle with tangible ideas, things that should be discussed. You already mentioned how this immediately was attempting to have an impact into the school system. In terms of 2020, what were some of the other like tangible, measurable effects in culture that the 1619 Project had right out of the gate? How did it impact culture?
Well, we saw rioting in about 220 locations, um, and there were upwards of 25 deaths that resulted, billions of dollars worth of damage. After the death of George Floyd, but contributing very greatly to that hysteria that I call it of those riots, which were unprecedented, unlike anything we've ever seen. Even the Black Lives Matter riots of 2015 and previous years. Um, and so Charles Kessler I believe it was, of the Claremont Institute dubbed them the 1619 riots because the objects of attack were not just police or, businesses, as you typically see in riots, but they were representations of American history. So every kind of statue was attacked, every monument. You had, of course, the Confederates, but you also had people who were slave owners, like Thomas Jefferson, people who had a tangential relationship with slave owning. And it went on to even Black Union soldiers and a pioneer woman and an elk, as I point out. It's absurd. What was going on? It's just this mass hysteria against our nation and its history. So it morphed from outrage over what had happened with George Floyd over a very limited video to this country as a whole, its foundations, and so forth. And a lot of that can be attributed to the fact that, in the year preceding, we had the 1619 Project. And when Nicole Hannah-Jones was asked about that, she said she was quite proud of the fact that her project had inspired these riots that resulted in death and destruction, death of Black and white people.
Well, and, as I look back, coming up in the 80s and 90s, I had a decent public school education, but I never even heard of the year 1619 as anything significant that I needed to worry about or be aware of in terms of the history of our nation. So, like, for the person who, like me, is like never had thought about 1619 before until this got into the news, like, what's the historical significance of the year 1619?
Yes, well, the year 1619 was marketed as being this new revelation, and it was not. It has been the basis of, Black history, the first comprehensive history of, I think it was called the African Negro from, or the American Negro from 1619 to 1880, was published in 1883 by George Washington Williams, the first um, African American to write a comprehensive history of American Blacks. 1619, so this date has been known. It is sort of an inglorious kind of Plymouth Rock landing. So the year before Plymouth Rock, in 1619, a privateering ship arrived in Jamestown with a number of Africans, around 20 or so, they're not exactly sure, who had been taken from a Portuguese slave ship. So that had been raided. They were taken aboard, and it was flying. The captain was a Captain Joe, and he needed provisions, food. So these Africans were exchanged for food. Um, they were not immediately slaves. Slavery had not been established in the English colonies. Their status was, uh, you know, nebulous at the point. But one thing we do know is they went into the tobacco fields and worked alongside the indentures. So about 90% of people coming in to that area of the country in the 17th century were indentures. These were Europeans who were poor or who had been imprisoned. And in order to come over, they agreed to work, for a plantation owner for a number of years, typically 7 years to pay off their passage. So they were there working side by side. And it wasn't until the end of that century that the institution of slavery was codified. So, and then I also discuss actually who it was that successfully argued to keep someone as a slave in debunking the 1619 Project.
I would imagine the folks behind the 1619 project, their motivations are altruistic and they want to right the wrongs and report correct history. I'm going to guess that the motivation is a little bit more nefarious than that. So I don't know if Nicole Hannah Jones comes out and really clearly states her overall motivations, but for the creators of the project, like, what's their end game? Why are they pushing us in this direction?
Well, she has come out in favor of reparations. She wrote a long essay for the New York Times in June 2020, and she went back to the points that she had made in the 1619 Project. She has also, made other statements in reference to reparations. So reparations is the goal. The goal is also a shift of the country to the far left. She has political aims. She has a political agenda, far left, sort of socialistic political agenda. Her motivations, as far as I can tell, have not advanced beyond what they were when she was in high school, when she was introduced to this radical Black writer by the name of Lerone Bennett by a high school teacher. She is biracial. Her mother is white and her father is Black, and she was bused to a largely white school. I think she had some issues with that. She took a Black studies class where her teacher radicalized her. She says she was incorrigible after she took that class and read Lerone Bennett, who coined Black Power in 1966. So that's where he was coming from. And she said she was incorrigible after that. She would not say the Pledge of Allegiance. Um, she would not stand for the singing of the national anthem, and she has remained in that kind of adolescent radical state ever since. If you follow what she says in social media and in her writings.
And in terms of, whether it's trying to cancel 1776, getting rid of Thomas Jefferson, pulling down statues and memorials, like what's the intent with destroying visible representations of history? Is it to create a vacuum to fill with something else? Like what's the point of doing that? We've never seen that to this level in our country in my memory till now.
Yeah, well, it's to forget who we are, the real principles upon which we were founded. Is having a Republican form of government and with opportunity and free enterprise. And it's the same as George Orwell described it in 1984. History just goes down into a memory hole. You forget who you are, and if you can no longer remember the freedoms that you had, or if you can no longer read about them or learn about them as they are passed on, you will not likely miss them. If all you know is this totalitarian socialistic state, then you are less likely to rebel against it. So there is a political motive. It's no coincidence that Stalin airbrushed certain people out of photographs, and that Soviet history, as was taught to school children, was not based on reality. Very airbrushed itself to favor the regime that's in power.
And in terms of spreading this idea, how did celebrity play a role in getting the word out there? I feel like that's something that's been overused all over culture the past couple of years of trying to use celebrity voices to spread what I would often say are bad ideas. How did celebrity play a role in the 1619 project?
Yeah, well, this is almost like a reoccurrence of radical chic, the concept that Tom Wolfe wrote about in the late 60s when the Black Panthers were invited to this party at Leonard Bernstein's, penthouse in New York City, and they were, sort of, given all this adulation because they were so radical. And, there has been this tendency for Hollywood to latch on to the latest radical, to come along, especially if he or she is Black, to sort of give credibility to them while they're, of course, living their luxurious lifestyles and probably underpaying their own servants and bodyguards and so forth. So Hollywood came right out, and also magazines like Glamour magazine. I had a friend who said she was reading that chapter of Debunking the 1619 Project, and I recount the interview in Glamour magazine. It's quite funny because there are probably 20 product endorsements. And so the interviewer asks Nicole Hannah-Jones, well, what's your skincare regimen? What's your favorite bourbon? And then she also goes into her beauty routines. And I'm thinking, okay, well, how is this relevant to someone who has taken on this project of, you know, rewriting all of American history, right? There's something that no legitimate historian would attempt to do or pretend he could do. And Oprah has taken on the project as producing a documentary. There was a commercial, before some kind of Grammy Award, not the Grammy Awards, but some awards for acting. I forget now what it is because I don't watch those things. But one of the famous actresses was in this commercial right at that time, when, a huge media buy, millions of dollars because of the viewership. And, she is promoting the 1619 project. She's filmed at the ocean, presumably at Point Comfort, where the ship came in. It's carefully staged, and she's in this white flowing dress. And so 1619 project is, being promoted in a commercial during the awarding of these acting. What is that called again? It's slipping my mind when the actors get their. It's not the Emmys. It's something else. But they get their awards for the best actor, best picture, and so forth. So it's a big Hollywood production, and this is where this project is being touted and promoted.
Well, I think in terms of people trying to figure out what to do with everything that's going on in culture, a lot of us are just trying to survive. And when we hear about things like the 1619 project, we're like, is this something I need to worry about today, or is this just a passing thing? But, big picture, what's at stake? Why is this important really for every person? And how can just the average citizen be a part of pushing back against this? I feel like people don't know, or they haven't decided how important it is, and they're not really sure how they can make a difference. So, uh, why is it important, and how do we push back against this?
Right. Well, first of all, it's not a passing thing. There is a hardcover version of this coming out, being published by Penguin in November. Nicole Hannah-Jones has been pushing it. It is, it's already in some top categories of Amazon, and has been signing pages before it's even published, I guess, the galley, or, before the book's even bound. And then there's also a children's version. So this thing is staying around, and libraries are buying it up. And as you can imagine, they're making room for it, having to eliminate other books. It is still there. The Pulitzer Center continues to expand its efforts among teachers. It's been giving them grants to incorporate these lessons, and incentivizing them to come up with their own lessons, has workshops for them. So it's here to stay. And the reason I wrote the book was to give parents and citizens some ammunition. What I try to do in my book is to fill in the gaps and to respond to the falsehoods in the 1619 project. And I try to do it by looking at legitimate historians. Often these people are on the left. They're not only conservatives, but if they're writing legitimate history, I have included it. I have 60 pages of footnotes, and so I pride myself on it that it's well researched. I'm lucky to be here at the Alexander Hamilton Institute for the Study of Western Civilization. One of the world's foremost scholars on slavery, a historian by the name of Robert Paquette, is here. He has reviewed my most of my chapters has been incredibly helpful in pointing me to resources. I have other colleagues across the country that I have requested information from. So I am all too willing to accept help and advice and correction. And so I think I've come up with a pretty good resource for people to answer when they are denounced at meetings as ignorant, or which is the common strategy, right? The educrats will say, well, you don't have the advanced degree, we do, we know what we're doing, you're not an educator. And hopefully they can use my book for that. And I think it will also be enjoyable to people because I point out little known facts about history, such as the number of Black slave owners that were in this country. And some of them, even in the early days of the Civil War, sided with the Confederacy. And also, I discuss the barbaric, cruel practices of slavery around the world. Not, it wasn't just here, which is what the 1619 Project promotes, this falsehood that it was a uniquely American, particularly Southern thing.
Well, and just with everything you've described, this certainly seems like it's kind of on track to be like Howard Zinn 2.0 in terms of impacting culture and attempting to change the narrative. I know for a lot of my listeners and viewers, this might not necessarily be a book you would normally pick up. I would challenge you to challenge yourself and read a little bit out of the space you would normally read. As Mary said, this isn't going away. This is a key thing that is attempting to really rewrite history and impact our culture for the foreseeable future. So you really do need to be educated and aware and equipped so you can tactfully navigate conversations. I can guarantee you these sorts of things are going to come up at Thanksgiving and Christmas and around the water cooler. And so I'd rather have you be informed and be able to recommend a great resource and have a solid conversation. Even if people disagree with you, if you can speak to something in a way that's meaningful, who knows, you might change somebody's mind or at least get them to interact with a great resource like Mary's book. Mary, for the listeners and the viewers who'd like to connect with you and find out more, where do we discover you on the web?
Yes, well, I have a site called marygrabar.com. That's Grabar. And you can, look at all the articles I've written. You can click on the link to buy the book. And I also have a site called dissidentprof.com. Prof is short for professor, dissidentprof.com. And there I publish a newsletter. I frequently publish articles on education, and I have an email list. So if you'd like to know if I've had something published or if I've had an interview or I'm going to have a speaking engagement, I encourage you to just sign up for my newsletter, stay in touch with me that way. You can send me emails and so forth, and I'd love to be able to, communicate with your listeners and viewers.
And like we do with every episode, we'll have links in the show notes to places where you can connect with Mary and pick up your very own copy of her new book. It's time to bring this episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show to a close. Many thanks for being a part of my conversation with Mary Grabar. Once again, our book today was Debunking the 1619 Project, Exposing the Plan to Divide America. And Mary, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing with us today. It's been an honor and a pleasure to have you back on the show.
Well, thank you so much.